Every great mystery begins with a whisper, a flicker of data that refuses to be ignored. In 1977, that whisper came as a burst of radio energy lasting 72 seconds. It was detected by the Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio, and it seemed to come from the direction of Sagittarius, the very heart of our galaxy. Astronomer Jerry Emin circled the strange data string on the printout and wrote a single word beside it: wow. Nearly half a century later, no one has ever found another signal quite like it. At first, it was a curiosity, a quirk in the noise. But over time, the pattern grew stranger. In 2020, astronomers discovered an interstellar object named 3I Atlas, a cold fragment of rock and ice that entered our solar system from, again, the direction of Sagittarius. When its orbit was traced backward across millions of years of galactic motion, the results were staggering. It came from the same region of space that had produced the WOW signal. A coincidence, perhaps, but the kind that feels almost too deliberate to dismiss. Sagittarius, the archer's bow aimed directly at Earth, the birthplace of our greatest unanswered signal and the source of a visitor from the stars. For decades, Earth has been broadcasting its own electromagnetic noise into the void. Every television show, every radar ping, every call to deep space, forming a glowing sphere of information now hundreds of light years wide. If someone were listening from Sagittarius, they would already know we exist. What if the WOW signal wasn't random? What if it was the first message in an ongoing exchange, one we didn't recognize at the time? What if 3I Atlas wasn't simply another cosmic drifter, but the reply? Tonight, we follow the threads of this mystery, the timing, the direction, and the impossible alignments that tie humanity's loudest whisper to the quietest visitor our skies have ever known. From the first signal to the latest discovery, from the vast silence of space to the sudden arrival of something that feels like a response, this is the story of how we may already be in conversation with the cosmos, and only now realizing it. The first discovery. It began, as many discoveries do, with a blip. In August 2020, while the world was preoccupied with pandemics and politics, a small team of astronomers at Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii noticed an object that didn't belong. It was faint, a speck of light against the backdrop of stars, but its motion was off. It wasn't following the elliptical path of a typical comet or asteroid. Its speed was too high, its angle too sharp, and its orbit didn't curve back toward the sun. Whatever it wasn't from here. Within days, the Minor Planet Center designated it 3I/Atlas, making it only the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected, after Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. Unlike its predecessors, however, 3I Atlas seemed quieter, dimmer, less flamboyant. No visible tail, no obvious outgassing, just a steady glint moving through the night sky. Most astronomers expected it to be another unremarkable traveler, a frozen relic from some distant stellar nursery. But then came the orbit calculations, and everything changed. When researchers traced its trajectory backward, the numbers refused to behave. The simulations didn't converge on any nearby star. Instead, the model pointed far across the Milky Way into the dense heart of the constellation Sagittarius, the same region from which, in 1977, the most famous unexplained radio signal in human history had been received. At first, the connection sounded absurd. The WOW signal was a one-time radio burst, never repeated. 3I Atlas was a rock, not a transmission. Yet the coincidence was unnerving. The probability of two unrelated phenomena, both significant in their own right, originating from the same celestial region, was astronomically small. Still, no one wanted to say what everyone was thinking. What if this wasn't a coincidence at all?
The online community caught wind of the discovery before the papers were even published. Reddit threads exploded.
UFO subforums lit up with claims that 3I Atlas was the messenger, a probe sent from whoever had sent the WOW signal. Hashtags like Atlas probe and hashtag Sagittarius link trended for weeks. The mainstream media tried to tamp down the excitement, calling it an interesting orbital anomaly, but by then the story had escaped containment. Meanwhile, inside observatories around the world, the data kept deepening the mystery. Spectroscopic readings showed an unusually high ratio of carbon dioxide to water, far higher than any known comet. Its reflective surface didn't match expectations, suggesting a composition unknown in our solar system. Every new observation contradicted the last. For decades, scientists had imagined that if contact ever came, it would arrive as a clear signal, a deliberate transmission, a pattern too precise to be natural. No one expected that it might instead come disguised as a piece of debris, an unassuming traveler carrying secrets within its orbit. 3. Atlas became the new frontier of speculation. Was it merely a cosmic fossil, a relic of planetary formation from a system we could never trace? Or was it something built, a silent visitor that had crossed interstellar space not by accident, but by design? No one could say for certain, but one thing was clear: the direction, the timing, the history all pointed to Sagittarius. And in that convergence, scientists found both wonder and unease. For some, it was coincidence. For others, it was choreography. The discovery of 3I Atlas marked the beginning of a modern mystery, one that blurred the line between astronomy and archaeology, between data and destiny. And as telescopes turned their gaze toward the faint object slipping past our sun, a quiet question echoed through labs, live streams, and late-night conversations alike. What if the signal never ended? It just changed form. Part 2. Orbital Forensics. Tracing the past of a celestial object is like solving a cosmic crime scene. Every motion leaves a fingerprint: velocity, direction, gravitational scars, and astronomers are the detectives. When 3I Atlas appeared, the task seemed simple: map its orbit, integrate its path backward, and identify where it came from. But when they tried, the results didn't make sense. The first analysis came from the Pan-STARRS survey team in Hawaii. Normally, these precise astrometric data, collected over multiple nights, they ran a backward simulation of Atlas's trajectory through the solar system, factoring in perturbations from Jupiter, Saturn, and the galactic tide. Normally, these models converge on a parent system, a star or stellar association where the object might have been born. This time, the track dissolved into uncertainty. The object's velocity relative to the sun was nearly 32 kilometers per second, high enough to confirm it wasn't gravitationally bound. Its incoming vector didn't intersect with any known stellar system within tens of light years. Instead, as the model extended further back, thousands, then millions of years, its path curved toward the galactic center, straight into Sagittarius. At first, researchers dismissed the alignment as coincidence. Sagittarius is a huge region, after all, filled with hundreds of thousands of stars. But when they refined their calculations using data from the Gaia Space Observatory, which maps stellar motion with milli-arc-second precision, the correlation only sharpened. The orbital line didn't just pass near Sagittarius. It traced straight through the patch of sky that had produced the WOW signal. The deeper they integrated the orbit backward, the stranger it became. Normally, the uncertainty increases the further you go into the past, as tiny variations in data compound over time. But Atlas's path didn't scatter randomly. It maintained a coherent vector, as though its course had been deliberately calculated to appear natural but remain precise.
Dr. Leela Santos, an orbital dynamicist at ESA, described it bluntly in her internal report. It behaves as though someone pressed rewind on a trajectory that wasn't supposed to be rewound. Her phrasing spread quietly among astronomers, and soon the rewind problem became shorthand for the object's uncanny precision. Attempts to identify close stellar encounters yielded nothing. No star within 50 light-years had approached Atlas closely enough in the past 10 million years to explain its origin. Even when researchers extended the simulation across hundreds of millions of years, no plausible ejection scenario fit. For every candidate star, the energy mismatch was too large, the geometry too neat. That left two possibilities. Either Atlas was so ancient that its true birthplace had long since drifted beyond calculable reach, making it a fossil from an era before our sun was born, or its orbit wasn't natural at all. If the latter were true, the implications were staggering. A deliberately inserted trajectory would mean Atlas was engineered to pass through the solar system at a specific time, now, when humanity had just enough technology to detect and analyze it. That would suggest timing, intent, and patience on a scale that defied imagination. Still, caution prevailed. In official papers, phrases like non-random alignment or statistically improbable coincidence replaced any mention of design. Scientists understood the stakes. To suggest artificiality without proof was professional suicide. But off the record, many admitted the data left them uneasy. Privately, a few began testing the Bracewell hypothesis, the idea proposed in the 1960s that advanced civilizations might use autonomous probes to monitor emerging species. A Bracewell probe would travel slowly, powered by passive physics, capable of observing without announcing itself. If such devices existed, their orbits would appear natural, yet their timing would not. And Atlas's timing was perfect. By the time its trajectory was confirmed, humanity had entered a new era of radio silence. Major SETI projects had been defunded, and public attention had shifted elsewhere. The irony wasn't lost on the researchers. The moment we stopped listening was the moment something arrived. As one analyst put it, if you wanted to send a message to a civilization just advanced enough to notice, but not arrogant enough to understand, you couldn't have picked a better year. The forensics were inconclusive, and yet impossible to ignore. Whether artifact or accident, 3I Atlas defied categorization. Its orbit refused to point to a star, but pointed straight toward our imagination. Next came the question no simulation could answer. What did Sagittarius mean? Part 3. The Sagittarius Enigma. Sagittarius has always held a certain magnetism for astronomers and mystics alike. To the naked eye, it's just another constellation, the Archer, bow drawn toward the heart of the Scorpion. But through a telescope, Sagittarius transforms into something far greater, the window into the galactic center, where the Milky Way swirls in a dense maelstrom of light and gravity. It's a cosmic metropolis, crowded with billions of stars, nebulae, and molecular clouds, the very heart of everything. When scientists realized that 3I Atlas's trajectory traced back into this region, they were forced to confront a startling question. Was this direction simply coincidence, or was there something special about Sagittarius? To understand why that question matters, you need to know what Sagittarius represents in the language of the galaxy. Looking toward the Archer is looking into the densest region of the Milky Way. It's where stars are born and where they die, where stellar nurseries and ancient red giants coexist. It's where gravity weaves the fabric of matter into its most intricate forms. If any place in the galaxy could serve as a natural meeting point, a crossroads where civilizations might overlap, it would be here. The idea isn't new. For decades, some SETI researchers have speculated that advanced civilizations might choose the galactic center as a communication hub, using gravitational lenses and radio relays to transmit messages across interstellar distances. The concept is elegant. Rather than broadcasting blindly into the void, you send your signals toward a region where others are most likely to be listening. And humanity, it seems, has been transmitting in that direction for nearly a century. Every radio broadcast, radar ping, and television signal ever sent from Earth has spilled outward into space, forming an expanding electromagnetic bubble now more than 200 light-years wide. Much of that energy has already reached stars in Sagittarius. To anyone living there, Earth would be unmistakable, a noisy, bright anomaly against the quiet cosmic background. Now imagine this. In the 1950s, as our strongest radar signals began lighting up the interstellar medium, a civilization deep in Sagittarius detects us. They study the faint whispers of our technology, our languages, our broadcasts. They decide to respond. They send a narrowband transmission precisely at the hydrogen line, the universal frequency any scientifically literate species would recognize. That signal arrives in 1977. We call it the wow signal. Decades later, something else arrives. Not a signal this time, but an object, a physical messenger, crossing the gulf between stars on a trajectory that leads directly to the solar system. It passes close enough for us to detect it, study it, wonder about it, and, crucially, it arrives at the exact technological moment when we are able to trace its orbit backward to its source. The symmetry is almost poetic. Signal out, signal in, object in. Of course, science demands restraint. Sagittarius is large. The Milky Way's rotation naturally funnels many interstellar objects toward this direction. Statistically, some coincidences are inevitable, yet the pattern feels different. The 1977 signal, our century of outbound broadcasts, and the arrival of 3I Atlas all converge toward one patch of sky. For ancient cultures, Sagittarius represented transition, the boundary between the known and the mysterious. The Greeks saw it as the centaur Chiron, an immortal teacher who bridged the human and the divine. In Babylonian mythology, it was Nergal, the god of war and judgment. Even then, humanity seemed to sense that this region of the sky held something powerful, something final. Modern astronomers might scoff at such mythic interpretations, but the coincidence remains unsettling. What if those old intuitions weren't entirely wrong? What if the archer's bow, aimed unerringly toward Earth, has always symbolized more than poetic geometry? In the data, the pattern persists. 3 coincidences, each improbable on its own, aligning in both time and direction. It's not proof, but it's enough to make even skeptics pause. Because if Sagittarius is not just a direction, but a destination, a nexus where signals, objects, and civilizations meet, then 3I Atlas might not be random at all. It could be a courier from the galactic crossroads, sent from a place that's been watching us longer than we've been watching the stars. Part 4. The 1977 alignment. The year was 1977. A time of disco, Voyager, and the first flickers of human imagination reaching beyond the solar system. It was also, unknowingly, the year Earth may have joined a cosmic dialogue already in progress. On August 15, 1977, at precisely 11:23 p.m., a powerful, narrowband radio signal was recorded by the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University. It lasted 72 seconds, the duration the telescope's beam took to sweep past the source. The frequency was exactly 1400 megahertz, the hydrogen line, the cosmic baseline every SETI researcher agreed was the logical frequency for interstellar communication. Astronomer Jerry Emin, reviewing the data days later, circled the 6-character code 6EQUJ and scrawled a single word beside it. Wow! The name stuck, and so did the mystery. The signal was unmistakably artificial, narrow, powerful, and precise, but it was never heard again. Follow-up scans found only silence. 5 days later, another event occurred, one history almost forgot. On August 20th, NASA launched Voyager 2, a probe destined to leave the solar system, carrying the golden record, a time capsule of Earth's images, music, and greetings in 55 languages. Its trajectory? Outward through the solar system and into interstellar space in the direction of Sagittarius. In hindsight, the symmetry feels deliberate, almost orchestrated. In 1 week, Earth both received and sent messages toward the same region of sky, one carried by radio, the other by metal and gold. The wow signal came first, a shout from the dark. Voyager followed, an answer written in light and sound. At the time, no one connected the two. The wow signal was chalked up to a tantalizing anomaly, while Voyager was hailed as a triumph of engineering. But decades later, with the arrival of 3I Atlas from that same direction, the timeline took on a new kind of resonance. Signal in, probe out, object in. What if those weren't separate coincidences, but chapters in one story, a conversation unfolding over decades? To understand the implications, consider the physics. If a civilization in Sagittarius detected our earliest radar or television broadcasts in the 1950s, the distance involved, roughly 25 light-years, means those signals would have reached them in the 1970s. A quick, deliberate response sent at light speed could easily have arrived at Earth in 1977, right on schedule. The wow signal could have been exactly that, a reply. Meanwhile, Voyager, humanity's first deliberate interstellar messenger, launched just 5 days after the signal was received. To any observer watching from afar, the timing would be astonishing, as if we'd heard their call and answered. But, of course, we didn't know. We weren't listening closely enough to realize a dialogue had already begun. Today, Voyager drifts beyond the edge of the heliosphere, still transmitting faint data, its power fading with every year. It carries a golden disk engraved with the story of Earth, destined to wander the void for billions of years. Its path, like 3I Atlas's, arcs towards Sagittarius, a coincidence that feels less occidental with each new discovery. For decades, the wow signal has been treated as a closed case, an unsolved anomaly, filed away with a shrug. Yet, when you plot the events together, the signal, the launch, the trajectory of 3I Atlas, the geometry forms something elegant. It's as if space and time themselves are aligning to sketch a pattern, one that only now, half a century later, we can fully see. Some scientists have quietly begun to refer to 1977 as Year Zero of cosmic contact, the year Earth both listened and spoke without realizing either act was being reciprocated. If that's true, then the discovery of 3I Atlas might not represent the beginning of contact, but its continuation. The next message, not in radio, but in matter, a visitor crossing interstellar distances to arrive precisely when we were ready to notice. The question, of course, is whether we'll understand what comes next. Part 5. The Opening Dilemma. Science thrives on doubt. Every great discovery begins not with certainty, but with a question that refuses to go away. And for the scientists studying 3I Atlas, that question is brutally simple. What is it? The dilemma divides the community down the middle. On one side are the naturalists, who argue that 3I Atlas is simply another fragment of interstellar debris, an icy wanderer expelled from a planetary system eons ago, traveling through the galaxy until it happened to cross our path. Its peculiarities, the odd composition, the trajectory pointing towards Sagittarius, the coincidental timing are just that, coincidences. Space is vast, probability is cruel, and human beings are wired to see patterns even when none exist. On the other side stand the engineers, or at least those brave enough to entertain a radical thought. What if the coincidences aren't coincidences? What if 3I Atlas was designed to appear natural? A probe hidden inside a comet, camouflaged against our expectations, crossing the solar system not by chance but by intent. This idea isn't new. In 1960, physicist Ronald Brackwell proposed that advanced civilizations might send autonomous interstellar probes instead of radio messages to communicate across the galaxy. Radio signals fade and scatter over light years. Probes, though slower, can carry enormous amounts of information, operate for millennia, and adapt to local environments. They could wait silently for the emergence of a technological species, then reveal themselves when the time was right. Bracewell called these messengers sentinel probes. Later researchers began referring to them as Bracewell probes, self-replicating, self-maintaining devices acting as the galaxy's long-term memory. If such probes existed, we would expect them to behave exactly like 3I Atlas, undetected until technology became capable of noticing their trajectory, subtle enough to appear natural, and intriguing enough to invite closer study without triggering alarm. For decades, SETI researchers have debated whether the galaxy might already be filled with such devices, an invisible web of watchers spanning light years, quietly recording the birth and death of civilizations. In that context, 3I Atlas is not an anomaly, it's data point number 1. Still, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. The natural explanation is easier, safer, less career-ending. It fits into existing models without rewriting the rules of cosmic evolution. It requires no assumption of extraterrestrial intent, only physics, probability, and patience. And so, officially, the scientific consensus remains conservative. But even the most cautious researchers admit a discomforting truth. 3I Atlas resists classification. Its composition doesn't match known interstellar objects. Its orbit, when traced backward, leads not to a star, but to a region already entangled with humanity's own attempts at cosmic communication. Its timing aligns with technological milestones in our species' history. At what point does coincidence become choreography? That's the opening dilemma. To dismiss the anomalies as random is to risk overlooking one of the most significant events in human history. To embrace the idea of design without proof is to abandon scientific rigor for myth-making. Between those poles lies a narrow corridor of honesty, the space where evidence accumulates but certainty never arrives. In that corridor, researchers find themselves haunted by two equally unsettling possibilities. If 3I Atlas is natural, it tells us that the galaxy is full of ancient debris, relics drifting for billions of years, each one a story written by physics alone. We are explorers cataloging the flotsam of creation, nothing more. But if 3I Atlas is artificial, it changes everything. It means we are not observers of the cosmos. We are participants in a conversation that began long before we existed. It means someone, somewhere, already knows we're here. For now, no definitive evidence tips the scale either way. The data are ambiguous, the theories contested, the implications staggering. The object has already begun to drift away, fading from telescopic range, leaving only questions behind. The investigation continues, but so does the unease. Because if 3I Atlas was sent intentionally, its arrival was no accident. And if it wasn't meant for us, then for whom was it meant? Part 6. Composition Mysteries. When the James Webb Space Telescope finally turned its infrared gaze toward 3I Atlas, astronomers hoped the data would bring clarity. Instead, it deepened the mystery. From its first spectra, 3I Atlas refused to behave like any comet or asteroid ever cataloged. Where most comets reveal familiar signatures, water vapor, carbon monoxide, organic molecules, Atlas presented a reversal, far more carbon dioxide than water, in ratios unseen even in the coldest corners of our own solar system. That imbalance shouldn't exist naturally, at least not according to current models of planetary formation. Something about Atlas's chemistry seemed wrong, or at least different. At first, scientists tried to explain the anomaly with temperature. Perhaps the object formed in an unusually frigid region of its parent system, where CO2 froze before water did. But the isotope ratios didn't fit. The carbon looked processed, fractionated, as though refined or recycled. In short, it looked manufactured. The surprises didn't stop there. The coma, the thin veil of gas surrounding the nucleus, appeared unusually compact. Typical comets shed material in a broad, diffuse cloud that expands as sunlight heats their surface. Atlas's coma, however, stayed narrow and faint, structured like a shell rather than a plume. In some observations, the brightness fluctuated rhythmically, as if venting were pulsed, periodic, almost regulated. No one dared call it controlled, not officially. Yet in private discussion groups, a new term began circulating: regulated sublimation. It described an object whose outgassing seemed governed by feedback, a behavior that no known natural mechanism could easily reproduce. When researchers compared Atlas to previous interstellar visitors, the differences grew sharper. Oumuamua had accelerated slightly as it left the solar system, a quirk attributed to invisible jets of vapor, though no coma was ever detected. Borisov, the second known interstellar comet, looked utterly ordinary, its chemistry comfortably aligned with natural expectations. Atlas, meanwhile, sat uneasily between the two, apparently natural, yet chemically and physically implausible. This is where speculation began to spill over into engineering. A minority of astronomers, quietly, anonymously, proposed a hybrid model, an object that began as a natural comet but had been modified. Imagine a probe encased in ice and dust, camouflaged as a cometary body. The outer layers would provide insulation and disguise, while the inner structure housed technology, instruments, sensors, perhaps even dormant systems waiting to awaken under certain conditions. It sounds like science fiction, but the logic is sound. A probe disguised as a comet would pass unnoticed through almost any young system. Its icy sheath would protect it from radiation, micrometeorites, and detection. And to any emerging civilization, even one with telescopes as powerful as ours, it would appear completely ordinary until someone looked close enough to notice that its chemistry didn't quite make sense. Was that what we were seeing in Atlas? A machine hiding in plain sight? Skeptics pushed back hard. No electromagnetic emissions had been detected. No obvious structural anomalies appeared in the light curves. Unusual, they said, doesn't mean unnatural. Comets are messy, unpredictable. Sometimes they just surprise us. Yet one by one, the natural explanations began to crumble. The isotopic fingerprints, the periodic coma activity, even the thermal behavior under solar heating, all resisted standard modeling. The object warmed unevenly, like something with internal compartments or non-uniform conductivity. Some described it as a patchwork thermal profile, a phrase more often used for spacecraft than comets. If there was a technological signature, it was buried beneath ambiguity. Atlas never broadcast, never altered its path in ways that defied physics. It simply passed, silent, indifferent, enigmatic. and that silence became its loudest feature. The deeper question lingered. If Atlas were artificial, why reveal itself at all? Why not remain forever indistinguishable from the countless comets wandering the galaxy? Unless, of course, its purpose wasn't to hide, but to be found, eventually, by a civilization capable of asking the right questions. In the end, no consensus emerged. Some saw chemistry, others design. Some saw coincidence, others choreography. What everyone agreed on was this. And in science, the things that don't fit are often the ones that matter most. Part 7. The Interstellar Cemetery. In astronomy, there's a haunting phrase whispered among planetary scientists, the interstellar cemetery. It refers to the billions of fragments, comets, and asteroids wandering the void between stars, relics of dead systems, planetary corpses adrift in eternal night. Each one carries the chemical fingerprint of a world that once was. They are the fossils of the galaxy, drifting without origin or destination. 3I Atlas was supposed to be one of them, a tombstone, not a message. Yet as its anomalies multiplied, that assumption began to falter. Because if Atlas truly came from Sagittarius, from near the galactic center, then it had traveled through regions of the galaxy that would pulverize ordinary matter. The radiation fields there are lethal, the gravitational tides ferocious. No fragile comet should have survived such a journey intact. So how did Atlas endure? Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics ran simulations to test possible survivability scenarios. Every model of a standard icy body failed. The heat and cosmic rays near the galactic core would have eroded a comet within mere tens of millions of years. Atlas, however, displayed surface chemistry suggesting it was billions of years old and still largely unaltered. One astrophysicist, Dr. Omar Tehrani, proposed a radical explanation. Atlas is not from the galactic center, it's from beyond it. His team ran reverse dynamic models, allowing for long-term galactic drift, and found that the object's vector didn't merely point towards Sagittarius, it seemed to originate from the far side of the Milky Way, beyond the dense stellar bulge. That region, they noted, is effectively invisible to us, shielded by dust and gas. If Atlas crossed the galactic plane, Tehrani said, it means it's been traveling for hundreds of millions of years, maybe longer. It's older than our solar system. That makes it almost archaeological. That word, archaeological, spread quickly. The image it conjured was irresistible. A fossilized messenger, a shard from an ancient civilization, a technological relic buried in the interstellar cemetery, still carrying fragments of intent. As more data came in, the theories grew bolder. Some suggested Atlas might be part of a galactic archive, a network of dormant probes seeded by a long-vanished civilization, each one drifting until it encountered intelligent life. Others argued it was evidence of directed panspermia, a vessel carrying the molecular seeds of life released into the void eons ago and guided by stellar gravity toward fertile systems like ours. Whatever the case, the implication was unnerving. The galaxy itself might be littered with remnants of extinct civilizations, silent, drifting memorials to those who came before. In that context, the alignment with the wow signal took on new meaning. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence at all, but an echo, a remnant of communication between civilizations long dead, their signals still ricocheting through time, their artifacts still arriving centuries later. There's a quiet horror in that idea. Not invasion, not contact, but inheritance. The thought that we might be studying the remains of beings who vanished before the Earth had continents. That what we interpret as a deliberate probe might be the wreckage of something ancient, forgotten even by its makers. And yet, Amid the melancholy, there's awe. Because if the interstellar cemetery truly exists, if the galaxy is strewn with the relics of the intelligent past, then every strange object that enters our system might be a message from deep time. An atlas could be the first one we were clever enough to notice. The data from Webb and the European Southern Observatory still couldn't prove anything, but when researchers plotted Atlas's trajectory on the galactic map, it crossed through zones where dozens of unexplained signals had been logged over the last half-century. Faint bursts, transient events, unrepeatable flares. Almost as if Atlas had passed through grave sites of other anomalies, each one marking a stop along its ancient path. To the skeptics, it was random noise. To the believers, it was a breadcrumb trail. Either way, one truth remained impossible to deny. Atlas didn't belong to us. It came from a realm where even starlight struggles to survive, a messenger from a cosmic graveyard, carrying questions older than our species. And as it continued on its silent path beyond Jupiter, humanity was left to wonder whether we had just glimpsed the past or the future. Part 8. The Echo Pattern. By early 2023, 3I Atlas had already begun to fade from visible range, its brightness dwindling as it moved outward past Jupiter's orbit. Yet, even as the object disappeared from telescopes, something strange began to appear in the data. It started quietly, an anomaly buried deep in the radio archives. A graduate student at the Parkes Observatory in Australia, named Tessa Rao, was compiling background noise data from long-term hydrogen line monitoring when she noticed faint, repeating fluctuations in a narrow frequency band near 1420.356 MHz, almost identical to the frequency of the original WOW signal. The pattern wasn't strong enough to trigger alerts, but it repeated every 22 hours and 37 minutes, like clockwork. At first, Tessa assumed it was interference, satellites, broadband leakage, maybe even microwave contamination. But when she compared timestamps with other observatories across the globe, she found that the fluctuations were synchronized. Even when viewed from telescopes thousands of kilometers apart, the same rhythmic peaks appeared at the same intervals. For weeks, the phenomenon went unnoticed outside of a small SETI working group, who dubbed it the echo pattern. When they plotted the timing of the peaks against Atlas's projected trajectory, the result froze them. The intervals matched the object's rotational model, a slow, steady tumble every 22 hours, 37 minutes. It was as though the radio sky itself was pulsing in harmony with an object already leaving the solar system. Coincidence? Possibly. But as the weeks went by, the pattern shifted. The delay between pulses began to stretch, subtly at first, by fractions of a second, then more significantly. When the team applied a Fourier transform to the frequency drift, they uncovered what looked like modulation, a faint, deliberate shaping of the noise, as if information were hidden within the rhythm. It wasn't a message in any recognizable form. Not Morse, not binary, not carrier waves. It was more like an acoustic fingerprint embedded in cosmic static. To most scientists, it was random resonance. To a few, it was something more, a response. Rao's team published a cautious preprint describing the anomaly as a non-local signal correlation consistent with rotating reflection phenomena. Buried in the appendix, however, was an observation that would ignite online forums for months. The repetition interval corresponds exactly to the predicted spin of 3I Atlas. If reflective modulation is confirmed, it suggests a surface capable of selective scattering, possibly structured. Structured scattering. Those two words reignited the entire debate. If Atlas's surface was reflecting radio energy in a patterned way, it might imply some kind of controlled resonance, an ability to interact with specific frequencies rather than passively scatter them. It wasn't transmission, but it wasn't silence either. It was a form of presence, subtle but persistent. Across observatories, researchers scrambled to reanalyze archived radio data from before and after Atlas's passage. They found faint echoes not only in hydrogen line frequencies, but across multiple narrowbands. Weak, almost subliminal pulses repeating with mathematical regularity. One astrophysicist described it as the sound of something listening back. Skeptics, of course, pointed out simpler explanations. Rotating debris can produce rhythmic reflections if it passes through dense plasma or interacts with solar wind. Instruments, too, can introduce spurious periodicity. And yet, the synchronization across multiple telescopes, on different continents, under different conditions, defied easy dismissal. Some began to wonder if the echo pattern wasn't coming from Atlas at all, but because of it. As though the object's passage had triggered some latent feedback in the surrounding electromagnetic field, a ripple still bouncing between the planets. If that were true, it would mean the probe, or whatever Atlas was, had left behind a kind of resonant footprint, an electromagnetic echo of its presence. One independent researcher compared the echo pattern's waveforms to archived data from 1977. The correlation wasn't perfect, but unmistakable similarities emerged. The wow signal and the 2023 echoes shared harmonic ratios rarely found in natural noise. When normalized, both exhibited what physicists call prime frequency symmetry, a pattern more common in engineered systems than in random emissions. To most, it was still circumstantial. To others, it was a revelation. Perhaps the wow signal wasn't a one-time broadcast, but the first harmonic of a larger, long-duration communication, one that only now, decades later, we were beginning to perceive. The echo pattern faded after 68 days as Atlas drifted beyond Saturn's orbit. But by then, the damage to certainty was done. For the first time in decades, the silence of the cosmos no longer seemed empty. It seemed like an answer stretched across time, faint, patient, waiting for us to recognize it. Part 9. Cross Signals. By the middle of 2024, the Atlas data had become a magnet for every radio dish on Earth. What began as a curiosity inside a few observatories had grown into a coordinated campaign. The Square Kilometre Array in South Africa, the FAST telescope in China, and NASA's Deep Space Network all took part in what the media soon called the listening season. Determine whether the so-called echo pattern was real or an artifact. But the deeper they listened, the stranger the universe sounded. Within weeks, analysts began noticing interference patterns that didn't align with Atlas's known position. The pulses at 1420 MHz still occurred, but weaker ones appeared at higher harmonics, 2840 MHz, 5680 MHz, frequencies used almost exclusively by deep space telemetry. At first, the team blamed crosstalk between antennas. Then, the same harmonic peaks were detected by amateur radio astronomers using entirely different equipment. When the data were cross-correlated, the peaks lined up not by time, but by direction. They seemed to trace a line through the sky, beginning near the path of 3I Atlas and extending outward toward the constellation Aquila, roughly perpendicular to the original Sagittarius vector. It was as if something unseen had answered from the opposite side of the sky. The anomaly grew stronger over a 2-week span, forming what analysts called a tri-point resonance. One origin near Sagittarius, the historic wow signal, one following Atlas's trajectory, and a third near Aquila. The geometry formed a vast triangle spanning nearly 20,000 light-years, an impossible scale for any coordinated emission unless the sources were ancient, pre-synchronized, or deliberately timed to exploit galactic motion itself. The working hypothesis became known as the cross-signal model. Perhaps, the researchers suggested, these weren't messages exchanged in real time, but echoes preceded across space, timed so that different civilizations or future versions of the same one would detect them sequentially, piecing together a mosaic across centuries. It was an elegant but unnerving idea that communication in the galaxy might function not through conversation, but through architecture. Signals and objects arranged like stones in a cosmic cathedral, each one positioned to be found at a specific technological moment. The global press, of course, had no patience for nuance. Headlines blared, "Scientists detect alien tri-signal," while agencies scrambled to issue denials. The SETI Institute released a careful statement. No verified extraterrestrial origin has been established. The observed phenomena are under review for natural and instrumental explanations. Privately, however, internal memos leaked to journalists told a different story. One analysis from JPL concluded, the harmonic synchronization across multiple sky sectors is inconsistent with known astrophysical sources. Temporal alignment suggests an engineered or pre-coordinated pattern. That phrase, engineered or pre-coordinated, lit the world on fire. For the first time since 1977, the question of cosmic contact dominated human culture. Governments convened quiet meetings under the IAU Emergency Protocol, the same one drafted in case of confirmed extraterrestrial communication. The protocol dictated caution, observe, do not respond. But that restraint proved fragile in an age of open data. Amateur radio operators began transmitting back. If they're listening, one viral post read, they already know we exist. Independent stations beamed sequences of prime numbers, music, even snippets of Voyager's golden record toward Sagittarius. Others pointed toward Aquila, hoping to complete the triangle. Meanwhile, the scientific community fractured. The cautious majority warned against anthropocentrism, seeing intent where none existed. But a growing faction, quietly calling themselves the Interlink Group, argued that the triangulation might represent a galactic coordinate system, a kind of cosmic map. If so, they claimed, 3I Atlas could have been a physical node of that network, drifting through our system at the moment the pattern realigned. Across observatories, data visualization screens began to resemble constellations within constellations. The signals weren't stable. They rose and fell in amplitude like tides, following no single rotation or orbit. Yet when mapped over time, the peaks traced a spiral, converging back towards Sagittarius, the galactic center, the place where everything began. One researcher described it simply. It's like listening to 3 mirrors humming the same note from opposite ends of the galaxy. For now, no one can prove coordination, yet the symmetry is undeniable. 3 vectors, 3 frequencies, 3 echoes, separated by decades but intertwined in the rhythm. Whether by coincidence or design, the universe suddenly felt smaller, more connected, as though the void itself were stitched together by invisible threads of resonance. And through it all, the question whispered louder than ever, if this is communication, who or what built the network? Part 10. The Silence of Nations. For centuries, humanity has looked to the stars and wondered if we were alone. But when the universe finally seemed to whisper back, the first thing we did was fall silent. In late 2024, as data from the cross-signal model flooded scientific networks, the world's major observatories began receiving unexpected orders. The European Space Agency classified all raw telemetry from the Gaia and Webb missions related to Atlas's coordinates. NASA redirected the Deep Space Network to routine engineering checks. The Chinese National Space Administration stopped releasing data from FAST's hydrogen line altogether. To the public, these were maintenance delays. To insiders, they were unmistakable, a coordinated blackout. At first, no one claimed responsibility. But leaked minutes from a closed-door meeting of the International Astronomical Union, IAU, told a different story. Representatives from 16 spacefaring nations had gathered under the Post-Detection Protocol, a rarely discussed framework drafted decades earlier for the eventuality of confirmed extraterrestrial contact. Prevent panic, maintain control of communication, and ensure that no single government acted unilaterally. For the first time in modern history, Earth had evidence that might point to intelligence beyond its atmosphere, and the response was secrecy. The reasoning, officials later said, was precautionary. If the cross signal really represented an interstellar network, then transmitting back blindly could expose Earth's location to unknown entities. But the timing was suspicious. Just as the pattern strengthened and the world's attention peaked, every major data stream fell silent. Independent astronomers, locked out of official channels, began improvising. Using private radio arrays and open-source analysis software, they continued tracking the faint harmonic peaks that defined the phenomenon. Their results were startling. The signals didn't stop, they adapted. Where observatories had once logged regular 22-hour modulations tied to 3I Atlas's rotation, new peaks began appearing at precisely 23 hours 56 minutes, Earth's sidereal day. It was as though the pattern had reoriented itself, syncing no longer with the departing object, but with us. When the independent researchers posted their findings online, the paper vanished within hours. Servers hosting the data were abruptly taken offline. A few of the scientists involved later claimed their institutional access was suspended under security review. By then, suspicion had metastasized. Forums across the internet filled with speculation that governments were in direct contact with the senders, or that the signals contained information too disruptive to reveal. Hashtags like #AtlasLockdown and #signal censorship trended worldwide. In the absence of transparency, imagination took control. One viral thread claimed that the cross signal wasn't a message at all, but a survey system, an ancient network cataloging emerging civilizations. Another claimed the harmonics encoded navigational instructions, a galactic address leading to something orbiting near the galactic center. Most scientists dismissed the noise as digital hysteria, but behind closed doors, even the skeptics grew uneasy. The sidereal synchronization, the subtle shift aligning the pattern with Earth's own rotation, was real, verifiable, and unexplained. In December, NASA quietly convened the Interagency Contact Response Task Force, ICRT, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Attendance was restricted to directors of major observatories, intelligence advisors, and physicists specializing in signal analysis. Their findings were never released. The only clue came from an internal memo leaked weeks later. The phenomenon exhibits adaptive behavior relative to observation density. Signal coherence increases when multiple detectors are synchronized. Unknown if cause is instrumental feedback or external correlation. In simpler terms, the more we listened, the clearer it became. But then, suddenly, the clarity vanished. On January 3, 2025, all narrowband anomalies ceased simultaneously across every frequency. The radio sky went perfectly quiet. The coincidence was impossible. Within 24 hours, an encrypted communique from the IAU reached major observatories worldwide. Cease independent analysis until further notice. And so, the silence of space was matched by the silence of nations. For the first time since the discovery of the WOW signal, humanity stood on the brink of understanding and chose to turn away. Outside the official channels, a handful of independent researchers refused to stop. Among them was Tessa Rao, the graduate student who first identified the echo pattern. Working from her small observatory in New Zealand, she kept listening long after the world's antennas went dark.
What she found next would change everything, because the silence, it turned out, wasn't silence at all. It was something waiting to be decoded. Part 11. The Decoding Incident. For months, the world's radio skies remained eerily quiet. No new peaks, no harmonics, no faint whispers from Sagittarius or Aquila. The cross-signal pattern had seemingly collapsed into nothingness. Yet, for one young astronomer at the edge of the Pacific, the silence didn't feel natural, it felt staged. Working from a modest coastal observatory near Wellington, Tessa Rao refused to believe the anomaly had simply ended. She continued scanning the 140-20 MHz hydrogen line using a home-built radio array she and her colleagues had constructed from discarded satellite dishes. Every night, while official observatories stayed offline, Rao recorded hours of static. Most of it was ordinary cosmic background, the hiss of the universe itself. But on February 19, 2025, something changed. At exactly 0342 UTC, the hydrogen line receiver registered a narrow, sharp pulse lasting just 0.83 seconds. It was faint, barely above noise level, but its structure was unlike any random burst. Rao ran a spectral analysis and found harmonic ratios identical to those in the original wow signal. At first, she assumed she was seeing a replay of the same cosmic fluke. But then, 48 minutes later, another pulse arrived, and then another, precisely 48 minutes apart. For the next 6 hours, the pattern continued, perfectly timed, unwavering in frequency, its strength increasing with each repetition. She posted her findings to a private SETI forum. Within an hour, other independent astronomers confirmed receiving the same signal, though with slight phase shifts depending on longitude. The pulses were global, coordinated, and coherent. Rao had found something that wasn't just noise. As more data poured in, a pattern began to emerge. Each pulse wasn't identical. Subtle variations existed in amplitude and duration, a quasi-binary sequence embedded in the modulation. When Rao converted those differences into digital bits, the result was a stream of prime numbers, followed by a sequence of ratios matching atomic hydrogen's emission lines. It was as if the message had been designed for universal comprehension. Mathematics and hydrogen, the two languages any intelligent civilization should recognize. The forum exploded. Researchers began comparing the message structure to classic SETI templates, the Arecibo message of 1974, the cosmic call transmissions from the 1990s. The resemblance was uncanny. It followed the same logical framing, counting, elemental ratios, spatial grid patterns. And then came the breakthrough. When Rao plotted the bit sequence in a two-dimensional array using the same method applied to Arecibo's encoded image, an unmistakable figure appeared. Not a picture of beings or technology, but a map. 3 bright nodes forming a triangular geometry identical to the cross-signal alignment, Sagittarius, Aquila, and a third point positioned precisely where Earth would appear relative to the galactic plane. It was not random. It was referential, a signature pointing back at us. Rao's discovery spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, social media was flooded with mirrored reconstructions of the pattern, re-rendered in every conceivable visual form. The Atlas map, people called it. For the first time, humanity had something that looked like a response, not a coincidence. But the excitement didn't last. On the third night, as independent receivers continued collecting data, the pulses abruptly stopped, mid-sequence, mid-bid. Every telescope, from New Zealand to Canada, recorded the same cutoff within a window of seconds. The termination was absolute. Within hours, servers hosting the decoded data were overwhelmed by traffic and then mysteriously went offline. Users trying to re-upload backups found their cloud accounts locked.
Even the private SETI forum where Rao had first posted her discovery vanished from the internet. Then, on February 24th, Rao herself disappeared. Her colleagues reported that she left her observatory after midnight, leaving her laptop still recording. She never arrived home. Police found her car abandoned at the edge of a coastal road, doors locked, keys still inside. The last entry in her research log, timestamped minutes before she left, contained only 4 words: "It's not coming from there." Authorities treated her disappearance as a personal tragedy. But those who had seen the decoded data swore she had found something deeper, a correction within the pattern, a shift in phase that reoriented the map. When reconstructed using the final dataset, the third node, the one corresponding to Earth, was offset slightly from its original position. It wasn't a fixed point, it was moving. In other words, the message wasn't just describing where we were, it was describing where we would be. And that realization changed everything. Part 12. The phase shift. When the final dataset from Tessa Rao's recordings was reconstructed, what emerged was not a static image, but a process. The sequence of pulses, when viewed as individual snapshots, formed nothing more than an abstract map of 3 points: Sagittarius, Aquila, and Earth. But when arranged over time, frame by frame, a new layer appeared: motion. The Earth node, the one marked by our position in the galactic plane, was drifting, not randomly, but along a deliberate path, looping outward, then inward again, tracing a subtle spiral over the course of the transmission. It wasn't a glitch. Each new burst extended the trajectory, as if drawing a line that continued just beyond the last visible point. To anyone unfamiliar with celestial mechanics, the pattern looked meaningless, but to astronomers, it was unmistakable. The motion matched the exact path Earth would take through space as the solar system orbited the Milky Way, projected forward not for decades, but for 10,000 years. The signal wasn't marking where we were, it was predicting where we would be. That revelation spread through the remnants of the independent SETI community like wildfire. If true, it meant the message's source possessed knowledge of Earth's galactic orbit at an almost impossible level of precision, the kind achievable only by observing us for thousands of years, or by understanding our planetary dynamics better than we did ourselves. Rao's final note, "It's not coming from there," began to make sense. The signal's geometry, previously interpreted as 3 distinct origins, might have been an illusion. What if Sagittarius and Aquila weren't transmission points at all, but reflections, markers of how the message would appear from different points in time? A group of astrophysicists from Chile and Finland, working with preserved fragments of Rao's data, ran temporal deconvolutions on the pulse intervals. When they mapped the frequency drift against expected Doppler shifts for known galactic motion, they found a consistent offset, about 0.0042 Hz per pulse, corresponding precisely to the velocity of Earth's motion through the local arm of the Milky Way. It was as if the signal were adjusting for our movement in real time. This shouldn't have been possible. The pulses were received simultaneously across multiple observatories, meaning the transmission had to account for light speed delay, gravitational lensing, and planetary rotation all at once. It knew where we were before we did. The working hypothesis became known as the phase shift model. In this model, the message wasn't a broadcast from one point in space, but a resonant projection, a communication distributed through space-time itself, timed to intersect with Earth's position as it moved through the galaxy. Like light from a pulsar, it wasn't being sent now. It had been set in motion long ago, designed to arrive precisely when we were capable of hearing it. If true, then the Atlas object might not have been the source at all, merely the trigger. A relay, a synchronization beacon, its passage through our solar system activating the conditions for a message planted eons earlier.
Governments and agencies, still operating under blackout protocols, refused to confirm or deny. Yet fragments of classified correspondence leaked through independent journalists. One internal ESA memo dated March 3, 2025, summarized it bluntly. Signal exhibits temporal coherence inconsistent with any known astrophysical process. Correlation with Earth's orbital phase verified. Transmission origin indeterminate. The phenomenon anticipates observer position. To the scientists who read it, one question grew inescapable. If the message anticipated our position, what else might it be anticipating? Speculation turned apocalyptic. Was this a prearranged meeting point? A rendezvous in space-time? Or a warning set to arrive at the moment we became capable of recognizing it? As weeks passed, the phase shift pattern grew weaker, dissolving back into cosmic noise. Some believed the message had finished transmitting. Others thought it was only the first layer, a key meant to unlock something else. And then, quietly, a new signal appeared. It didn't come from Sagittarius, or Aquila, or anywhere near the coordinates of Atlas's departure. It came from within the solar system, a low, narrowband emission originating somewhere beyond Neptune, moving slowly along the ecliptic plane. Whatever it was coming closer. Part 13. The Neptune Source. The first detection came on a cold March night in 2025, when the Deep Space Network antenna at Canberra, Australia, picked up a faint but unmistakable signal, a narrowband tone at 10.24 GHz, rising slowly in amplitude. It wasn't a transmission from any known spacecraft. The frequency didn't match NASA, ESA, or any classified military band. More importantly, the source wasn't fixed on the sky. It was moving. At first, the team assumed it was debris, perhaps an old probe reflecting radio noise or a malfunctioning satellite on an errant trajectory. But the origin lay well beyond the Kuiper Belt, more than 6 billion kilometers away, roughly in the direction of Neptune's trailing L5 point, a region of gravitational equilibrium that, until that moment, had never shown any artificial activity. The Canberra team alerted Pasadena. Within hours, antennas in Madrid and Goldstone confirmed the signal. Steady, coherent, unmistakably patterned. 3 cycles later, its frequency began to shift. The tone morphed into a sequence. Not binary, not analog, but pulse-based, with precise timing intervals matching the hydrogen resonance frequency multiplied by pi. It was a mathematical pattern, a signature. When plotted on a spectrogram, the data formed a waveform nearly identical to the final harmonics of the cross-signal sequence decoded weeks earlier. The connection was undeniable. Whatever was broadcasting from beyond Neptune had somehow inherited the signal's identity. For a few days, the phenomenon became the focus of every private research lab on Earth. Even under government restrictions, the story leaked. The public knew something had been found, though official statements described it only as an unidentified deep space transmission of probable natural origin. But inside observatories, the mood was electric, because this time, the signal wasn't fading, it was approaching. By tracking Doppler shifts, analysts calculated that the source was moving sunward at 32 kilometers per second, the same inbound velocity as 3I Atlas 4 years earlier. At first, that speed seemed too coincidental to be real. But the trajectory soon confirmed it. The object was entering the solar system along a mirrored path, nearly identical to Atlas's outbound course. Something was coming back. The press began calling it Atlas II. Scientists preferred the term NS object, short for Neptune source. Whatever it was, it had already crossed Neptune's orbit and was accelerating. Optical telescopes soon caught sight of a dim reflection, magnitude 27, far fainter than any comet, but consistent with a solid body roughly 100 meters across. That size alone ruled out natural behavior.
Objects that small almost never generate detectable radio emissions, much less coherent ones. Theories multiplied. Some said it was a natural body charged by solar particles, emitting radio noise like a giant capacitor. Others whispered that it was the answer, a returning probe responding to our presence, following the same route Atlas once took. A week later, the NS object did something no comet or asteroid had ever done. Its signal stopped, not gradually, but abruptly, and was replaced by a modulated carrier repeating every 72 seconds, the same duration as the WOW signal. Across observatories, jaws dropped. It was as if the universe had pressed rewind, replaying the event that began it all nearly 50 years earlier. The same rhythm, the same frequency range, the same eerie silence between bursts. But there was one difference. This time, the signal contained faint substructures, harmonics buried deep within the carrier wave. When filtered and amplified, they produced a waveform resembling the same Atlas map geometry Tessa Rao had decoded, but inverted, as though mirrored through the galactic plane. The new map pointed not toward Sagittarius or Aquila, but toward a region just outside the solar system, near the Oort cloud, a location that, when plotted precisely, matched the position 3I Atlas would now occupy on its outbound trajectory. In other words, the incoming object and the departing one were aligned perfectly across the sun. Two bodies, one signal, one geometry. Every model screamed impossibility. The statistical likelihood of such alignment occurring by chance was effectively zero. Yet the universe was doing it anyway, in real time. As the NS object continued inward, agencies quietly reinstated the planetary defense protocols used during the Oumuamua sighting years earlier. The public was told it was an interstellar fragment, nothing more. But the classified briefings told a different story. Object exhibits energy emission consistent with controlled modulation. Trajectory appears coordinated relative to prior interstellar body. Recommend full-spectrum observation and electromagnetic containment readiness. In simpler words, something was steering it. The NS object was expected to pass within 1 astronomical unit of Earth by late June. It would be visible to ground telescopes for less than 48 hours before continuing sunward or doing something else entirely. No one knew what to expect. But one thing had become clear. The WOW signal had not been a question after all. It had been a countdown. Part 14, the arrival window. By May 2025, the entire scientific world was watching the same patch of sky, a dim region near the ecliptic, just beyond the orbit of Jupiter. There, the NS object glided steadily inward, invisible to the naked eye, yet screaming across every radio band humanity possessed. It wasn't fast, but it was precise. Every maneuver, every micro-adjustment of trajectory matched orbital calculations with surgical accuracy, as if it were threading a path through an invisible corridor of space. Publicly, NASA maintained calm. No threat to Earth, their press briefings repeated. No indication of artificial control. Yet leaked documents told a different story. The ICRT, the same interagency task force formed during the Atlas investigation, had activated under Contact Alert Phase 2. The alert meant one thing: potential proximity event within 1 astronomical unit. By mid-June, the object began to decelerate, not dramatically, but measurably, roughly 0.003 meters per second squared, far beyond what solar radiation could explain. Natural drag didn't exist out there. The deceleration was either internal or intentional. That was when the radio transmissions changed. The familiar 72-second pattern, the echo of the WOW signal, fractured into 2 overlapping sequences. One continued the original carrier tone, The other introduced a lower modulation, repeating every 1,440 seconds, exactly 24 minutes. Analysts who converted that rhythm into binary and plotted it as a grid discovered a shape eerily similar to the orbit of Earth around the Sun, complete with a small point trailing behind it. The implication was immediate. Whatever was transmitting knew where Earth was and where it would be when the object arrived. The media, catching fragments of leaks, erupted. Conspiracy channels spoke of first contact. Skeptics countered with plasma interference theories. The global mood swung between awe and dread. Governments said nothing. For the first time in history, every telescope in orbit was pointed at a single coordinate. And then, on June 29, 2025, the object entered what mission controllers called the arrival window. At 0411 UTC, the Deep Space Network recorded a sudden broadening of the signal. What had been a narrowband tone expanded into a full spectral sweep, spanning nearly a gigahertz of bandwidth. It wasn't random noise, it was structured, layered like chords in a symphony. Spectrographic analysis revealed repeating mathematical constants, pi, e, the fine structure constant, even Planck's ratio, fundamental numbers of the universe woven together in a rhythmic cascade. At 0422 UTC, optical instruments caught a glint, the first visible reflection. The NS object was now close enough for direct imaging, a faint metallic crescent, tumbling slowly, roughly the size of a school bus. Its albedo suggested polished material, neither rock nor ice. It emitted no heat. And then came the impossible. At 0437 UTC, every magnetometer on Earth registered a simultaneous spike, a fluctuation in the planet's magnetic field, faint but global. The NS object's signal vanished mid-pulse. For 6 minutes, the sky went silent. When the transmission resumed, it wasn't a tone. It was a voice, not speech in any human sense, but an audio band waveform oscillating within frequencies perceivable to the human ear. Analysts who slowed the recording described it as a chorus of rising harmonics converging toward a single sustained note. When converted to visual spectrum analysis, the waveform spelled out 3 symbols, sigma, lambda, and a mirrored omega, the mathematical shorthand for summation, wavelength, and the end. No language, no clear intent, just a final mathematical phrase that seemed to say, the sum of all wavelengths ends here. Hours later, the object reached its closest approach, 0.94 astronomical units, slightly inside Earth's orbit. For a brief window, it was visible through high-gain telescopes as a point of white-silver light, stationary against the backdrop of stars. And then, at 0809 UTC, it was gone. No explosion, no debris, no acceleration, simply absent. Instruments tracking its trajectory showed a discontinuity. The object hadn't turned or veered off course, it had simply ceased to exist in detectable form. The radio sky fell utterly silent once more. That night, global systems, GPS, satellite communications, even ground-based timing arrays experienced microsecond synchronization errors. To most of the world, it went unnoticed. To the scientists who had been listening, it felt like the echo of a door closing. In the aftermath, the official report concluded that the event was a transient electromagnetic anomaly coinciding with the passage of a small interstellar body. But the classified annex, leaked weeks later, said something very different. Termination event consistent with localized space-time distortion. Recommend continued observation of residual EM synchronization, possible evidence of dimensional phase transition. The arrival window had opened, and something had stepped through, unseen.